Hello and welcome back to another episode of Crochet Cinema. I am your host, Allie, also known as Something Crochet. Now, if you've been following me for a while on TikTok, you know that I've been waiting to make this episode for quite some time, so I am very excited. Today, we're going to be discussing over the garden wall and making this vest. Over the Garden Wall is an animated miniseries that premiered on Cartoon Network on November 3rd, 2014. Created by Patrick McHale, the 10-episode miniseries follows half-brothers Wirt and Greg as they travel for the strange, eerie, mystical unknown trying to make their way back home. With beautiful animation, a unique soundtrack, and above all, an interesting plot, it's no wonder that the show has become as popular as it is. Over the Garden Wall won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program and has garnered a dedicated following over the years. Now let's get started by going over where you can find the pattern and graph to make your very own Over the Garden Wall vest. So to get started, this vest uses the Strawberry Fields pattern by HayHayCrochet, which you can find the free written and video tutorial that I will link to in description, so I will not be going over exactly how to make the vest as she has already done that for us. You can see that the only changes I made to the pattern were I didn't include the strawberries, obviously, and then I decided not to include the collar. The links to the written and video tutorial you guys can find in the description, as well as links to her TikTok and Instagram. You should definitely check her out if you haven't already. She makes awesome free patterns. As for the graph, I modified a graph by Llamas&Lattes, a blog that creates really cool knit pattern, and you should also check them out if you haven't already. I will link to the original chart as well as their blog in the description. So you guys can see that from the Llamas&Latte pattern, I used the basic shape of Wirt and Greg, but I decided to add color and I replaced Beatrice the bluebird with the beast, and I added color to the trees as well. You will be able to download this pattern in the description below. I use Stitch Fiddle to make it. The graph is made to fit a size medium on the vest pattern, but you can add more or less rows if you download the graph and just change the number of columns. So this is the back panel of the vest, so you can follow HayHayCrochet's tutorial up until the back panel. You can make the front panel all of the ribbing on the front panel and the bottom, and then the ribbing on the bottom back panel as well. Now, I highly recommend that before you continue this video, you go and watch Over the Garden Wall for yourself. It's only 10-11 minute episodes, so it's really a quick watch, but there's so much depth and complexity in each episode that I won't really be able to do it justice here in this summary. But if you don't have time to watch it or you just don't feel like watching it, I will be breaking down the series now. So episode 1, The Old Gristmill. This is where we meet our protagonists, Wirt and Greg. They're half brothers who have gotten lost in the unknown and are trying to find their way back home. As they travel through the mysterious woods, they meet Beatrice, a sassy bluebird, as well as the woodsman who warns them about the beast. but Wirt remains skeptical of the man. The brothers are attacked by a giant wolf, who Wirt assumes is the beast, but after defeating the wolf, it turns back into a normal dog. Now on to episode 2, Hard Times at the Husk and Bee. The brothers are reunited with Beatrice once again, and she tells them of Adelaide of the Pasture, an old woman who will be able to help them return home. They enter Pottsfield, a town that seems eerily empty, but they eventually find the town's inhabitants, a bunch of pumpkin-wearing people. The townspeople are celebrating the harvest, and when Enoch, the giant leader of the town, sees Wirt and Greg, he charges them with trespassing, disturbing the peace, and destruction of peace, eventually sentencing them to physical labor. Turns out the townspeople that are wearing pumpkins on their head are all skeletons, and the boys are let go after digging up one of the other skeletons for the town. Now, episode 3, the group of Wirt, Greg, Beatrice, and the frog, who's been with them this whole time, continue their trek towards Adelaide, Greg singing the Adelaide Parade song, when he runs off and finds a schoolhouse. Beatrice accuses Wirt of being a pushover, and out of spite, he decides to join the school, slowing their journey down. While Wirt befriends some of the small animals that are students at the school, we learn that there is a wild gorilla on the loose. The teacher, Miss Langtry's father, visits the school and threatens to shut it down, so Wirt, Greg, and the animals decide to put on a concert to earn money to keep the school open. At the end of the concert, Miss Langtry is reunited with her fiancé, who happened to be stuck in the gorilla costume. Episode 4 is Songs of the Dark Lantern, and in this episode, Wirt, Greg, and Beatrice are riding in the back of a cabin before they make their way to a tavern, which Beatrice is kicked out of because she's a bird. They don't want a bird in the tavern. Each of the tavern's inhabitants has a very specific job perfectly suited to them, and this causes Wirt to realize that he doesn't really know where he fits in or what he wants to be. Several very catchy songs ensue, and Wirt really resonates with the idea of becoming a pilgrim. The tavern people believe that the woodsman that Greg and Wirt had met in episode 1 is the beast, and due to the lantern that he carries, and we learn that the beast turns people into edelwood trees. We then see that the woodsman is running out of edelwood oil to keep his lantern lit, and if he runs out of wood, the light of his daughter, which is in the lantern, will also go out. Alright, on to episode 5, Mad Love. Wirt, Greg, Beatrice, and Fred the Talking Horse, who they had met last episode at the tavern, make it to Quincy Endicott's mansion, and he is a rich, very wealthy tea maker. Beatrice convinces Wirt and Greg to pose as his nephews in order to get some money from him, as they need 2 cents to board the ferry that will take them to Adelaide's pasture. Quincy tells them that he saw a portrait of a woman in his mansion, and he believes that he also saw her ghost, so he has become obsessed with finding this ghost. While Beatrice and Wirt search for loose change, Greg wants to see the ghost that Quincy was talking about, so they venture further into the mansion. Beatrice tells Wirt that she actually used to be a human, but after throwing a rock at a bluebird, she and her family were cursed, turning them all into bluebirds, which is why she wants to go to Adelaide so that she can return back to her family and turn them all back into humans. Meanwhile, Greg, Quincy, and Fred the horse make it to the portrait. The woman Quincy believed to be a ghost actually shows up, and it turns out it is his competitor, Marguerite Gray, and she thought that Quincy was a ghost haunting her house. It turns out that they're so wealthy that their massive mansions connected at one point, and they never even realized it. Quincy and Marguerite give the boys the 2 pennies that they need, and as they are leaving to make their way to the ferry, Greg throws the 2 pennies into a pond. Next up is episode 6, Lullaby in Frogland. Wirt, Greg, and Beatrice finally board the frog steamboat that they need to get to Adelaide's pasture. Because Greg had thrown away their pennies, the 3 had to sneak onto the boat, and they disguised themselves as a member of the band, Wirt deciding to play the bassoon to blend in. The boat makes it to its destination, but Beatrice is hesitant to go to Adelaide, saying that they should wait until tomorrow to go. Wirt tells Beatrice a bit more about his life back home, and Beatrice says that if they decide not to go to Adelaide's, they won't ever have to go home. Wirt Wirt knows that he can't stay there forever and decides that they're still going to go to Adelaide's in the morning, but in the middle of the night, Beatrice flies off to visit Adelaide herself. She tells the old woman, who was planning on using Wirt and Greg as child servants, that she refuses to give the boys up and that she'll take their place instead, but little did she know that Wirt and Greg had followed them, so Adelaide captures Wirt and Greg, but Beatrice is able to open the window and the night air melts Adelaide, and Greg and Wirt are able to free themselves and take off into the night, leaving Beatrice behind as they thought that she had betrayed them. Up next we have episode 7, The Ringing of the Bell. In this episode, Beatrice remains at Adelaide's while Greg and Wirt walk through the rain and meet the woodsman once again. The woodsman warns them that they cannot lose hope or give up or else they will fall victim to the beast. Thinking that he's still their enemy, Greg and Wirt run away and come upon a shack which they think is abandoned, but they soon meet one of the inhabitants, a young woman named Lorna. Another inhabitant, Auntie Whispers, a frightening looking woman, returns to the shack, forcing Greg and Wirt into hiding. We learn that Auntie Whispers has a bell that she can use to control Lorna, and she forces her to cleaning as she says that keeping busy keeps the evil spirits at bay. Auntie Whispers goes upstairs so Greg and Wirt can come out of hiding, and Wirt tries to convince Lorna to escape with them while Greg wanders upstairs, eventually waking Auntie Whispers. The three have to hide in a closet from Auntie Whispers, but it turns out that Lorna is actually who they should be worried about as she turns into a monster in the closet. After threatening Wirt and Greg, we learn that the frog had swallowed the bell, so Wirt uses the bell to command the spirit to leave Lorna, saving her. Lorna decides to stay with Auntie Whispers as Wirt and Greg leave, and Auntie Whispers warns them of her sister Adelaide. Little does she know that they've already dealt with her. Wirt and Greg set off again, but with no sign that they'll ever make it back, Wirt loses all hope that they'll ever make it home. On to episode 8, Babes in the Woods. Beatrice is still searching for Wirt and Greg, who happen to be floating down a river, Wirt still hopeless as ever. They reach land and Greg has high hopes, but Wirt tries to get him to admit that there's no way they'll ever make it back. Wirt blames Greg's messing around for getting them lost in the first place, and all Wirt wants to do is sleep, so this encourages Greg to take on the leader role. Greg wishes on a star to go home, and several cherubs come down and awaken Greg's spirit, taking him up to Cloud City, where he meets several committees and leads a little animal band. Greg inadvertently releases the north wind on Cloud City, but he manages to capture the evil wind and is granted one wish by the Queen of Cloud City. Greg wants to go home, and the Queen assures him that he can, but he cannot go with Wirt, as Wirt is hopeless and has been claimed by the beast, leaving his fate in his own hands. Greg apologizes for getting them lost and instead uses his wish to free Wirt and leaves with the beast. Wirt awakens and finds Greg's gone, hearing him leaving with the beast, and as he chases after, he falls into a frozen lake but is luckily saved by Beatrice. On to episode 9, Into the Unknown. This is a flashback episode and the first episode that doesn't fully take place in the unknown. So Wirt is in his room working on a mixtape for his crush, Sarah, which he plans to give to her at the football game. Greg tries to get Wirt to go look for frogs, but Wirt declines as he needs to give the mixtape to Sarah, so Greg takes the mixtape to give to her, thinking he is being helpful when in reality, Wirt is extremely nervous for her to listen to the tape. At the football game, a few girls take the tape and tell Wirt that Jason Funderburker is going to ask Sarah out. Wirt and Greg go to retrieve the tape, but the girls had already put it in Sarah's jacket. They follow Sarah to a Halloween party, which Wirt says he wasn't invited to, but they go in anyway. Sarah sees Wirt and is happy that he's there, even inviting him to hang out at the graveyard with a couple of friends. Wirt is so nervous talking to her that he declines, but he decides to follow them afterwards anyway. The group sees Wirt and Greg spying on them from behind a great headstone and invites them to join, but when a cop shows up, it sends the group scattering. Greg and Wirt scale a wall to get away, and from the top of the wall, Wirt sees Sarah discovering the tape in her pocket. And Wirt goes off on Greg, claiming that him and his dad ruined everything. The two jump down from the wall, and Greg finally finds the frog that he had been looking for, and they don't realize they're walking on a train track until a train comes barreling towards them, forcing them to jump out of the way. As they jump, they roll down a hill, knocking themselves unconscious and fall into a stream or a river, and Wirt reawakens in the present with Beatrice's family, and decides to head off into the snowstorm in order to find Greg and save him from the beast. The series ends with episode 10, The Unknown. Beatrice finds Greg and the beast in the snowstorm, and the beast is asking for 3 specific items from Greg, those being a golden comb, a silver spool of thread, and the sun. The freezing wind blows Beatrice back to Wirt, and she tells him what she saw. The woodsman is nearly out of oil to keep his lantern lit, and the beast brings him Greg, who has slowly become an edelwood tree. The woodsman refuses, as he was unaware that the wood that he had been using to keep his lantern's soul and the light lit were made out of lost souls. The beast and woodsman fight, and Beatrice and Wirt find the lantern and Greg, and Wirt takes the opportunity to apologize to Greg for being so hard on him, and Greg admits that he stole the rock that he had with him this whole time, and he thinks that's the reason why they're in this mess in the first place. The beast returns with the defeated woodsman and tells Wirt to give him the lantern, offering to make him a deal, saying that if Wirt becomes the lantern bearer, he'll be able to keep Greg's spirit alight in the lantern, similar to how the woodsman is keeping his daughter's soul alight in the lantern. Wirt refuses, saying that the deal only seems like it'd be good for the beast, like it's his soul that needs to be kept alight. Wirt threatens to extinguish the flames, which sends the beast into a panic. Beatrice has to return home, and Wirt gives her the scissors that he had taken from Adelaide that she needs to turn her family back into humans. The woodsman extinguishes the flame, defeating the beast, and Beatrice and Wirt say their goodbyes. Wirt wakes up in the water and pulls Greg and the frog to the bank, where they are found by the friends that they had been with in the graveyard and rescued. Sarah wakes Wirt up in the hospital, where they're surrounded by the other kids from the Halloween party, and Sarah tells Wirt that she didn't have a tape player to be able to listen to the mixtape he made her, so in a very courageous move, he invites her to listen to it with him. The woodsman returns to his daughter, and in a short montage, we see the fate of the other characters, like Lorna and Auntie Whispers, Miss Langtree and Jimmy, the frog in the mud, the boatfish, Fred, Quincy, Marguerite, and finally Enoch, all going happily about their lives. Beatrice and her family are humans once again, and the series ends with Greg returning the rock. Now, I've gone over graph reading a lot more in depth in some of my other videos, so I'm not going to go too in detail in this one, but it will be enough for you to finish your vest. So there are 3 main things you want to remember when doing graph crochets and reading graphs, those being: number 1, each square is a stitch. Number 2, you finish the stitch before the color switch, with the color being switched to. And 3, each odd row is read right to left, and even rows are read left to right. So unlike the last episode where I did a couple of practice rows on the Ghostface banner, which if you haven't seen, you should go check out, I am just going to do a quick little practice row to show you how to actually apply these 3 rules and what they look like. Now, I think the first rule is pretty explanatory. Every square on the chart corresponds to a stitch on your project. So if I choose a random square, let's say 30, 15, that means that the square is the 30th stitch in the 15th row. Now, rule 2 is very important to be able to color switch, which is integral to making graph crochet, and I'll do a quick demo of that. Color changing is something that I've gone over in depth a few times before, so if you want a really in-depth tutorial, I would check out some of my other videos. This is just going to be a really basic, just so you know how to do it sort of tutorial, so I'm not even using like the colors that you would use on your vest. It is just basically how to switch colors super simply. So I just have this little like test thingy here. It's 20 half double crochets. It's just a row of 20. I've done 2 stitches here, so I am going to just show you how to switch to different colors and then back to this color. So let's see. So we're 2 stitches in. Let's say in the 4th stitch we're going to switch to this green color here, okay? So we're done 2 stitches, and we want to go change to the colors on the 4th stitch. So on our 3rd stitch, instead of finishing that half double crochet like that, we're not going to finish the stitch. So the stitch before your color change, you don't finish. So instead of pulling through that orange, I'm going to drop the orange to the back. You always want to drop your colors to the same side. That'll be the inside of your work, the wrong side of your work. I'm going to pick up my color that I'm changing to. In this case, it's green. I'm I'm going to finish that half double crochet with our new color. And then our 4th stitch is going to be green. And let's say I want the 6th stitch to be tan. So 1, 2, 3, 4. The stitch before the 6th stitch, we're not going to finish with our green. We're going to drop our green to the back. We're going to pick up our new color, which is this tan. And then we're going to finish the half double crochet with the tan. And then boom, our 6th stitch is this tan color. 7, 8, 9, 10. Now let's say I want the 12th stitch to go back to orange. So on this 11th stitch, I'm not going to finish. I'm going to drop the tan to the back. And there's 2 ways you can do this. You can either have like little bobbins of yarn so that you don't get tangled. So I would pick up my bobbin of orange yarn and I would ignore this piece here. I would just attach a new piece of orange yarn. Or what I usually do is so I'll look at the back and I'll see this is where the orange yarn is connected. I'll pull this over, leave a little bit of slack so your work isn't being really pulled tight. So you can see there's a little bit of slack. I don't have to use that much, but there's some slack. It's not pulled too tight. And then I'm just going to finish that. And then the 12th stitch will be orange. So that is how you switch back to a color that you've already used. I'll turn and show you the back. So you can see I don't go over my yarn. I don't crochet over it. I just leave it hanging on the back, and then if I want to pick it up, I'll pull it across. Now on something like the Over the Garden Wall vest, let me get that out really quick. Give me a second. Something that I would change if I were to make this vest again is I would have a bobbin of this brown yarn. So you see we have the trees on either side. I decided to not use a bobbin and just carry the same yarn all the way across to the other side. So it creates this like really messy sort of, there's a lot of brown yarn here because there's barely any brown in the middle. So I'm going from one side to the other. So what I would suggest doing is having a second thing, just a bobbin or another skein of your brown yarn on either side, so you're not bringing this all the way over to the other side. It'll just make it look a lot neater and you won't have all of this in your sweater, which honestly, it's not really too big of a problem. It just would look a lot neater and it wouldn't get caught on like when you're wearing it if you were to have 2 separate things. I hope that cleared up color changing. Like I said, this is not too in-depth of a tutorial because if you really need to know how to color switch, I've done like full in-depth tutorials. Specifically my ghost face banner, I did several rows of color switching. So you're just going to read your graph, switch colors. It's important to remember that the stitch before your color change is when you finish that stitch with your new color. So like I did here, I wanted the 4th stitch to be green, so I finished the 3rd stitch with that green yarn instead of with the orange. Our first row here, you can just ignore this because this is the base row, but on our first row, we read it right to left. So when you go up to your 2nd row, you're not going to be reading it right to left again because it wouldn't line up. So you go right to left on your 1st row, and then your 2nd row, left to right, and you keep doing that for your even and odd numbers. It doesn't have to be right to left to right for even. It can be left to right, right to left, even. It can be, your odd can be left to right, and your even can be right to left, as long as it's consistent when you're reading the chart. It doesn't really matter. So I hope that cleared it up for you, and let's keep going with the video. So you're going to follow the pattern to make the back panel, and the only thing you're going to be doing differently is switching colors with the stitches. Everything else is the same amount of rows. It's a very basic back panel. It's just the stitches you color change with. Now my main color, I decided on this like hunter green, but you can change that if you want. It does not have to be green. You can make it whatever color you want. And if you find yourself still struggling with sort of reading the graph or understanding how to do graph crochet, you can check out my other 2 videos as they have a much more detailed process. But I'm assuming you know the basics and you can figure it out for yourself pretty much. And if not, there's tons of tutorials, including mine, that you can check out. And now that you know how to work on your back panel, let's get into my rankings of the episodes. So this was my second full watch through of the series, and while it was just as good as I remember, the first time I watched it like right around Halloween, and the fall vibes of the show go perfectly with that time of year rather than just a random weekend in the winter. With that being said, let's get to ranking. We're gonna start with my least favorite episodes to my most favorite episodes. At number 10, we have episode 5, Mad Love. I didn't really find this episode to be all that interesting, and I think that's because Quincy Endicott lacks a lot of the mysterious nature that a bunch of the other side characters have throughout the show. It didn't really feel that integral to the plot, and yeah, I just didn't really like it that much. At number 9, we have episode 6, Lullaby in Frogland. A lot of this episode is spent on the frog boat, meaning they're surrounded by frogs, and the frogs don't really talk, so there's not really any of that interesting dialogue that they share with a lot of the other more interesting characters in the show. Adelaide was sort of built up so much for the first, let's say, episodes 2 through 5, that she was going to be this like magical woman who could help them, and her sort of introduction and subsequent defeat felt very underwhelming and a bit too quick. I thought she was going to play a bigger role in the series. I do have to give a shout out to the Adelaide Parade song though. At number 8, we have episode 8, Babes in the Woods. I do think Cloud City is cute and everything, but this felt like a bit of a filler episode before the climax. At number 7, we have episode 4, Songs of the Dark Lantern. The songs are really catchy and fun, and the introduction to the beast keeps you wanting more, but that's about all this episode has to offer. At number 6, we have episode 7, The Ringing of the Bell. I think Lorna and Auntie Whispers are both pretty interesting characters, and I like the twist that Lorna is the monster, even though we think Auntie Whispers is going to be the monster because of how she looked. The first time I watched it, I definitely did not see that twist coming, and I have to give this episode bonus points for the cute little black turtles that are in the shack where Lorna and Auntie Whispers live. At number 5, we have episode 3, Schooltown Follies. Potatoes and Molasses and the Adelaide Parade song are both great, very catchy, adorable songs. The little animals at the school are also very cute, and the gorilla is just a really wacky side plot. And amidst all of this sort of like cute weirdness, we get good insight into who the characters are, and it makes you care about them a bit more, making it a solid episode. At number 4, we have episode 2, Hard Times at the Huskin Bee. The all-around eerie atmosphere of this episode is great, and it really, after a relatively normal first episode, it really sort of gets you hooked into what the unknown is and how just strange it can be. At number 3, we have episode 10, The Unknown. I think this was a satisfying conclusion to the miniseries. We get to see not only how the story ends for our protagonists, but also a lot of the side characters as well. While it doesn't give a definitive answer to whether or not the events of what happened in The Unknown are real, I don't think that that's necessary, and I would rather sort of have this like wonder of, did that really happen, or was that sort of all made up in their heads? Number 2, we have episode 1, The Old Grist Mill. I think this is an opening that really gets you reeled in. It doesn't go completely off the rails, but you can tell that there's something sort of strange going on, and you really want to keep watching to see what exactly is going to happen to these two boys and where they are and sort of all the strange things that are going on. And finally, at number 1, my favorite episode is episode 9, Into the Unknown. I think this episode is my favorite because it's what really makes the story work. Rather than starting with this episode, we have this almost at the total end, which makes it even more effective. We're able to fully immerse ourselves into the unknown for a majority of the series before finally getting some context into what's actually going on and what Wirt and Greg's life was before they entered the unknown. I think this really brings everything together, and it's what makes the series great. That is going to be the end of our episode for today. Thank you guys so much for watching episode 2 of Crochet Cinema. I want to give a shout out to HayHayCrochet and Llamas&Lattes again. I could not have made this video without their awesome patterns. If you haven't checked them out already, make sure you do. They make really awesome crochet and knitting content. If you aren't already following me on TikTok and Instagram, I will link those down below so that you don't miss out on sort of sneak peeks into what I'm doing next, and you should subscribe here too so you don't miss the next episode of Crochet Cinema. Speaking of the next episode of Crochet Cinema, do you have a movie, TV show, or other piece of media that you'd like to see me cover and create a project for? Comment down below any suggestions you have, and you might just be the lucky person who gets to choose the topic of next video. I have a couple ideas, but I'd like to get some suggestions from you guys to see what you guys want to see in the future. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Crochet Cinema, and thank you so much again for watching. See you next time.